A more constructive relationship based on shared interest, persuasion, and improved communication. Now, who said that? Well, here's a hint. It wasn't Chester Crocker, but in fact, it was Naledi Pandor, the ANC's 86th ranked candidate for parliament in the May 2024 elections. Welcome back to the program, folks. This is Chris in central Pennsylvania calling out the hypocrisy of the ANC with its foreign policy. In 1980, while serving as an advisor to Ronald Reagan's presidential campaign, Chester Crocker published an article in Foreign Affairs. In that article, Crocker criticized the Carter administration for its overt tactics and public pressure approach to get Pretoria to end the system of apartheid. Crocker rightly contended that the Carter approach had failed. He argued that Washington could gain leverage with South Africa, and I quote, for genuine opportunities to exert influence. The U.S. could steer between the twin dangers of abetting violence in the Republic of South Africa and aligning ourselves with the cause of white rule, and thereby could underpromise and overdeliver. This policy was called constructive engagement. Constructive engagement entailed encouraging change in the apartheid system through a quiet dialogue with South Africa's white minority leaders. That is, through private inducements and positive incentives rather than through sanctions or public pressure. Does this sound at all familiar? Even remotely familiar? While Crocker and President Reagan were roundly criticized and hounded by the media and congressional demagogues, also known as Democrats, their approach bore more fruit than that of the Carter administration, although some analysts disagree with this. But here we are 44 years later, and a majority black government is using the same foreign policy approach with Iran and Russia. We shouldn't cut off engagement with Iran or take a hard position on Russia, Naledi Pandor says. International Relations and Cooperation Minister Naledi Pandor, Naledi, of course, being Tswana for star, told an American audience that the best thing South Africa can do is keep talking to Iran and show it the benefits of democracy. So South Africa wants to use constructive engagement to deal with Iran and Russia, pariah rogue states. Now, what are the benefits exactly that she's referring to of democracy? 85 murders a day, no electricity, rampant lawlessness, no water, a burning parliament building, tens of millions of South Africans more living in abject poverty than in 1994, a thoroughly incompetent ruling party drunk on kleptocracy, collapsed infrastructure, gender-based violence and rape being endemic, the billions of dollars in investment and property lost in the July 2021 internal ANC insurrection in KwaZulu-Natal and Soweto, the Pala Pala scandal, digital vibes, the arms scandal, Travelgate, the raided dairy farm, kill the boar, the abrogation of property rights, endless racist legislation, fees must fall, dependency on state handouts. What success are we talking about here when it comes to democracy with the ANC in South Africa? Folks, the hard truth is South Africa's version of democracy has little to be proud of since 2005. After a decent start out of the gate, the ANC has turned into a typical post-independence liberation movement that is a pariah actor and preys upon its citizens. Now, South Africa is trying to isolate Israel in various ways for its reported human rights violations in Palestine and has taken a firm position on the Israeli-Hamas war, but it takes a very different approach to the genuine genocidal campaigns in Myanmar against the Rohingya and in China against the Uyghurs, both groups of which are Muslim, by the way. With regard to Iran, South Africa seeks to be an example of the benefits of democracy. And in the case of Russia, it seeks to keep lines of communication open to help mediate peace. Really. South Africa's foreign minister can't even bring herself to call Iran an authoritarian regime. She told her audience in the United States, for me, I don't know whether they are an authoritarian regime. She's not aware of Iran being authoritarian and didn't have that definition in her logbook. Don't know what an authoritarian state is. Not heard of North Korea, China. However, she does claim to be worried about the state of women in Iran. I do have a concern about women and their rights in Iran, and this is something that I've discussed with the government of Iran. Well, I'm glad she cares about women's rights and women's issues in Iran because she's sure, and her party sure don't seem to care about it in South Africa, where they've done nothing to stamp out gender-based violence and endemic rape. Now, she elaborated on Pretoria's approach to Iran by saying, I believe what we have to do as South Africa is not close off engagement with any country, but use our own democratic success as an example to others. Boy, that sounds like constructive engagement to me. It Yet the ANC did not like the Reagan administration approach in the same fashion back in 1981. So can we criticize the ANC as vehemently as they criticized the USA in 1980 for the same foreign policy approach to deal with pariah states? Judging by Naledi Pandor's own words, South Africa uses our own post-apartheid progress as a way of exemplifying for others what we think this is a good practice to adopt. She said in the context of maintaining relations with Iran. News 24's Philip DeVette correctly notes that Iran is a theocracy where an unelected guardian council decides who may stand for elections based on their loyalty to the Islamic establishment, and where political protest is met with deadly force. In its 2024 rankings, the Freedom House rated Iran 11 on a 100-point scale of freedom. So we can and we should expose the ANC as hypocrites. This is no different than Chester Crocker and Reagan's policy of constructive engagement, which was roundly criticized by Democrats, anti-apartheid activists, and the ANC. Yet here it is, 44 years later, and the ANC, when they're in charge, is taking the exact same approach that they found it appropriate to criticize Reagan for. It's not so easy being in charge of Naledi Pandor and the ANC, finding out the realities of foreign policy as they seek to walk the tightrope between their paymasters and fellow travelers in Beijing, Tehran, and Moscow, making their hypocrisy patently obvious, even the most casual observer. Well, there you go, folks. Naledi Pandor, constructive engagement, Chester Crocker 2.0. Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to leave a comment behind and give us a like. Catch you next time right here on Chris Wyatt Reports.